Good morning, blessed be tree family. If you're wondering what I'm looking at, it's just to make sure everything's good on framing. Oh, got a pen in there still. So we have several things to address this morning. Some of you all know I'm REVJC. I'm the producer of Canna Movie, Rapture 420, Canna Movie, Marijuana, going over the United States history as a hemp colony. I'm also the owner and operator, chief executive officer, all that good stuff for several other business entities, including some media companies. Unveiling DL Hero as a streaming platform. Also, DL Hero Studios is a distribution path. 9-to-1 Productions as a music label post-production company for mastering, and Castaneda Film for production. We are a full-scale studio and streaming platform, all of that good stuff in the mix. Some of the things that have come to my attention that need to be addressed is we have a lot of PSYOP, a lot of cointelligence within the cannabis community, which I've recently seen. Most discussions are not even talking about the real issues. They're talking about the semantics. So I wanted to share with you a couple perspectives that might help you know how to deal with stuff like this, or you flip it around, reverse it, what kind of thing. The ability to process information is something that sets intelligence in front of other things. That's communication. That's the ability to delegate information accordingly to departments, classifications, all of those kind of things. Basically, it's military. Some of the things you're unaware of, but would help you understand why it is that we have the predicament that we're in right now, is in America, for the longest time, the media, and I know this because I worked with television stations, with colleges, and worked with newspapers and all of that in the past, and I still have access to the Associated Press groups and all of that wonderful stuff. Basically, what's going on is we're given an approved source of media. That approved source is then delegated to all affiliates to run. That programming is then regurgitated across the nation, and you've seen videos of people finishing each other's words from different stations in different states and all that. That's by design. So the reason why I'm addressing this first is, how is it that someone is choosing the information that is worthy for you and you're not at the least bit skeptical of it? Also, if you know anything about psychology or the study of the mind, the soul, all of that, you break the fourth wall. The fourth wall, by looking into it. It's a form of hypnosis. This is something psychologically that they teach us in film schools, and also point of view, psychology, all of that. Eye contact matters because you're speaking directly to an individual instead of around the individual, or they're watching you in a third party. You're interacting directly. So basically, our news programming is entertainment because it's been reclassified during the Obama administration. They decided that news was no longer necessary to have a code of ethics or journalistic integrity or verifying sources, that it was actually a commercial vehicle for advertising. We know this because if you Google a little bit and study about the 2 reporters that were fired for studying growth bovine hormones in milk, this is important because they were told, hey, we're not going to go against one of our sponsors. They're bringing us lots of funds. You're going to have to drop the story. Even though the story was for the public benefit, which is what the press, mainstream media, if you would, legacy media, whatever you want to call it, is designed originally to do. It was a mouthpiece for the people to let them know. What's happened over time is that instead of allowing you to have a full grasp of brevity of the situation at hand, they give you the Cliff Notes version of a book that most of them have not read. This is basically the undertone of what's going on. Is the regurgitators, the meat puppets that we have as a mainstream media, are sharing with you what they're told and are allowed to say. And so we had the Smith-Mundt Act. Google that, find out what that means, because it basically, in the Obama administration, I think it was about 2013, they repealed the Smith-Mundt Act, which meant that they're now legally allowed to propagate false narrative. False narrative is another way of saying propaganda or lies. Some people call them PSYOPs, some people will call them false flags. These are all co-intelligent measures. Now, due to the nature of national security, I will not report on a specific previous example overseas, although those are available at your discretion into your research. Just the phrase co-intelligence officer, operatives. This is how, when we go into a foreign, institution, whether it be another country or a holding, what we first do is we establish lines of communication. We take over how they're getting their information, whether it be blocking the airways, whether it be radio transmissions, whether it be newspapers. Sometimes you would see, in the old Vietnam and those kind of era, they would be dropping pamphlets over an entire city, or you would see how these individuals would reach out to the existing leadership of a community and try and turn one of them, so that they're now setting up a trap or a narrative to where that they give them the option of being in leadership of their controlled institution. This is not something new. Technically, America is a co-intelligence measures from Great Britain. When we lost the War of 1812, we lost our Library of Congress with all of our existing treaties. We lost our first White House. Basically, we were repatriated under a legal system of permissible law to the Esquire structure, which is through the International Bar Association. Again, I'm not going to address how this works. I'm just going to share with you the general scope, and I impose upon you the diligence to now go and take pauses on what I'm saying and go research for yourself the full explanations for what I'm saying, because it's available to you. Nothing I'm sharing with you is outside the spectrum of what you are available to find if you actually put the time in, the research in. With that said, we've talked about co-intelligence as a military operative, that they have a status as a individual that would go in, work with the existing, turn it, sway it, control its narrative, control its media. We do this as a military venture whenever we go in for occupations. In the form of America, in 2013, we had the same kind of a scenario go on. We had a president who was under a lot of opposition, actually had some military officials that he had swear an oath of allegiance to him directly rather than the Constitution. And those are parameters that, you can see the scope and brevity of if you do your own research and find out, how is this functional? How is this possible? Because, again, Constitution, Declaration of Independence, is supposed to be what unites us all. But what we're not taught, excuse the police traffic, Lord bless them and help them. What we're not taught is that the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, was a repatriation movement. It was a co-intelligence operative to basically restructure the Articles of Confederation, which gave the states too much rights. They propagate that this was about slavery as its primary focus, because that was the financial gain of the South. What you have to remember is that at this time, we didn't have enough currency. We didn't have enough dollar. None of that stuff existed, because coinage was how we weighted everything, and it was with silver. And actually, I shared this in Canon movie Rapture at 420. There's a gentleman by the name of Joseph, I think it's Jinks, who is recorded in the History of Manufacturing, which, you know, there's a copy over here. It's History of Manufacturing in the United States by Clark, and this is volume 1 from 1607 to 1860. And Mr. Jinks records the first patent or first device created is a larger hemp scythe. It also records in there that you would pay your taxes with commodities like flax and hemp. Most importantly, here's the biggest PSYOP going on right now in our nation with the cannabis world. How many of you know what the word hemp means? It's a forgotten word for most folks, right? You know, several hundred years ago, that's what they founded this country as, was a hemp colony, brought in a bunch of Irish immigrants, forced the orphans and stuff, brought them over first, and then their parents to come over to establish the hemp trade here with textiles and industry, because Great Britain had Ireland basically doing its hemp. And we brought those immigrants here in our first round of slavery and earning indentured servitude. But when we bring up the facts of the chronological history, it doesn't fit the narrative of the textbooks, because the textbooks are designed as a divisionary means for the Hearst family and others who make a monopoly status on the petroleum-based products that they're producing, chemicals that they're producing, paper industry that they're producing, because hemp would produce more paper, everything from toilet paper all the way through writing, all the way through you know, mulch, everything that our society needs in a big picture, the majority of which could be provided with the hemp plant. This is the real reason why I'm addressing the name hemp first, because there's a monopoly claim. So if you know anything about history, you know about King James. Everybody knows the King James Bible, right? You know what I'm talking about? So King James wanted to control the Church of England's Protestantism from Catholicism and reestablish his court and structure to where that he no longer was dependent upon Italy's Vatican seal of approval of notary and all those kind of things that they were doing. So he reinstituted his own structure with English instead of the Latin, used the Vulgate translations of the Bible to translate into English, created the King James Bible, uses the full document, send it over to the colonies to basically impose through the Bible structure tithing, which we would call taxation now, a structure of basically implementing community rules and guidelines, your birth records, your marriage records, death records, all of those kind of clerical documents were originally recorded in the first cover pages of the community Bible. This is important because all education, all plant medicines, basically husbandry, agriculture, all of this stuff was all wrapped up into the original doctrines of the text, being stewarded to a community by the controlling interest of a foreign power. Now, this is important because when we establish in our minds, first and foremost, the word hemp, I've said this word a couple times now. Now I'm going to give you the chronological definition of where we are from Francis Bacon's recording and others who record, you know, little parody when hemp is spun, England is done, all of that. Hemp stands for the Tudor and the Spanish monarchies monopoly of this throughout the world, because it's a Tudor dynasty acronym: Henry, Edward, Mary, Philip, Elizabeth, H.E.M.P.E. Okay. And what ended up happening is if you're growing hemp-e or hemp, okay, then that belongs to England. So what we had was a mentality of rebellious nature, cousins and distant relatives from the monarchy. By the way, George Washington is a nephew from King Edward, distant relative, but he's still in the bloodline of the kings. And most of that structure of propriety was all relative to monarchy-controlled bloodlines. Now, the important part of what we're getting to is if you fully comprehend that the founding of the nation was as a hemp colony, it was based around trade and agriculture. They didn't use currency like what we do today. If we have a full comprehension of commodity exchange, commodities are precious metals, plants, things like oil, things like fuel reserves when it comes to electricity, wind energy, water propulsion, water. All of these things technically are commodities, including what was used all the way through the railroad era as currency, alcohol. Alcohol was used as an example within the railroad industry. A railroad worker would go and do their weekly bidding and whatnot, and they would get some exchange tickets to go to the rail house's trade station. Not train station, trade station. It's like the community shop. And those tickets would be for usually something called Applejack, which is basically a frozen variation of apple cider. And it was a very expensive high ticket item that would allow them to say, okay, you can either have the Applejack or you can trade it for the same value for whatever else you want in this place. So alcohol was used as currency to build the railroads. People don't know this. They don't understand why it was the way that it was. So when we went to war, keep in mind, the Federal Reserve System was established over a Christmas break. When the majority of politicians had gone home, there was a small majority left. They established a quorum and basically instituted the Federal Reserve Act of, I think it's 1913. Now, I'm jumping through history here for you so that you can see chronologically. When we established the Federal Reserve Act, right after that, you have Teddy Roosevelt rising to power. If you comprehend the Bull Moose Party and flipping of the politics, you had basically at this time, the Republican Party was for the Republic, for the people, had already established itself as some group of individuals that validated the African Americans and the freedom and the solace of all men being created equal. And this political allegiance was important because there was a lot of rising to power individuals, and there was members who were elected into office. You had a restructuring that went on at this time. And this is important to note because film and entertainment played a key role in reestablishing the racial supremacies that we have today. If you look at The Birth of a Nation, which is Griffin's film, where it talks about the Klansmen, is what it was called elsewhere, because it's talking about how there's all these African Americans here, and it was all white people wearing blackface. It's really difficult to watch today, but if you're a film history buff, if you're somebody that wants to understand how do we get to this point, you have to understand that the communication, the entertainment, the structure of what we had propagated a narrative that caused racial inequality and division of supremacy. So what I'm saying is that the entertainment industry the first feature film in America was a film about the Klansmen. And this was to reestablish to everybody, you might be free, but you still under, the white hoods that are going to run up in your neighborhood, burn a cross and scare you, because we could still get you and you don't know who we are, because we're all of that stuff, right? So it's important to note that psychological operations or cointelligence, or in the case of entertainment and media, are used to sway a political opinion. Or when I say political, that's a partisan. Partisan means divisionary. So anytime you hear me use the word politics, I want you to fully comprehend govern means control, menta means mind, control, mind, partisan, party, division. So when you hear the word politics, that means government controlled division. Okay, that's what that phrase actually means. For the longest time, the pulpit was actually in control of what's gone on in America. I say this to you with discretion because it eroded over time. The petroleum industry really wanted to take over the healthcare at the time. The clergy was in charge of the natural medicine that was going on. You had folk medicine. We had a lot of natural plants and all those kind of understandings that we were using at the time throughout the whole country. They decided that microbiology, or the study of germs and bacteria and those kind of things that were beyond the human eye, that was causing the illnesses needed to be studied, and then they recircumvented all of the education system to say that you're not somebody that agrees with these particular structures, then we're going to stop funding you. And this overarching theme of stopping the funding on a muzzle, if you would, of not agreeing with the narrative is a common factor even today. In the timeline of after JFK had flown to Jamaica, met with Haile Selassie, decided to throw him a big party here in America, even a parade. When was the last time you saw a parade for a foreign dignitary? He brings over his silver, plates, bowls, cups, cutlery, all of that, to melt down into coinage. And that's where the silver came from for what JFK was going to do with his executive order for coinage. Shortly after, about a week after he published the executive order, he was assassinated publicly, killing of what's going on. At the time, Bush was in charge of the CIA. They strategically placed filmmakers to be, or a filmmaker to be, at the exact spot with a window of only 7 minutes. A reel of footage in a 35 millimeter camera only goes in about an 8-minute block. So he only had a certain amount of time from there to there. And that was in the timeline of when he was assassinated, to guarantee that this footage was represented. That's part of the detail of why I'm like, don't necessarily know, because film is a very expensive thing. To fund all of this, to do all of this, there was a bigger reason. Now, I say that because the first thing that Lyndon B Johnson does, Lyndon B Johnson is the guy where JFK was assassinated. He decides that he's going to repeal that executive order, stop the U.S. from minting its own coinage. That's why we have the commemorative JFKs and all of the coinage that had silver in it, and then it went to 60% and then 40%, and then they got rid of silver again in coinage. We had the Gold Act. We had basically in World War I, when we went to war, they called in the marker on all of our gold reserves for Great Britain to get our gold in circulation. When the military returned home, they then made alcohol illegal so that you couldn't trade alcohol as a commodity anymore. You had the prohibition alcohol that happened. Then you had the church step in and say, hey, religious freedom is about land rights and identification. We're using these vineyards to make sacramental wine. You can't tell us we can't do that. They had to, cease prohibition, give it back to us. And then what happens shortly after is the gold is pulled out of circulation. The Gold Act happens to where that you can no longer hoard gold or have gold. And when that happens, basically the gold is out of circulation. Keep in mind, in 1914, 1915, the $10 bill, which I have a copy of, you can find it, has hemp farmers on the back of it. And the $10 bill is worth gold. It says it on it. So the gold standard is removed. Then you have all this go on. And now we're jumping ahead in history. JFK tries to bring in silver again. He gets assassinated for it. Then you have Lyndon B Johnson that's basically repealing all of his stuff. And Lyndon B Johnson is really afraid of the African American empire. He's afraid of the mentality of the socialization and the banding together of the military assets and of the African American church. We know this because things like the Black Panther Party, who was very instrumental in helping the survival of communities. You had returning veterans from the Vietnam era war coming home to basically rebuild their neighborhoods. You had paying structure. And so we have programs that were created, dossiers by the FBI and such, to create operatives within those parties to cause them to be controllable. And something that you may not know, but to give you a little bit of clarity, the term SWAT, funding for these special weapons and all like that, that actually came from the infiltration of the Black Panther Party in LA. They had somebody that was bringing guns into their clubhouse, and they're like, hey, wait a minute, we have our private weapons at home. We're military soldiers that are retired and came home. We're allowed to keep our arms at home. We don't keep our guns at the clubhouse because that's not what we do. Why are you doing this? And then shortly after the place is raided, they're getting weapons charges, they're getting all of these indictments, getting all these other things that are going on to basically create the illusion that these are militant individuals who are basically saying, we're going to protect the neighborhood. Now, here's the interesting part. The funding for SWAT came right as a way and a vehicle to stop the militant African American community. Truth be told, that's where that came from. So when you have all these people breaking in doors with SWAT and raids and stuff, think about that concept for a second and how much of that is laid waste to how many families and homes and everything else. I'm not saying I'm against law enforcement, by the way. I'm not saying that in the least, because I have to make sure there's good and bad in everything. And I, for one, hold that the sheriff's department is the only elected official that represents the people. The rest of them are imposing statutes and they're limited. They're tax collectors on behalf of, they're land pirates, if you would. That's my particular opinion. Now, I'm not saying that they're not good people or they don't have families or you can't raise a beer with them at the pub or whatever. This is not an issue that I'm addressing any more than what I just have. I need to say that because what happens next is Lyndon B Johnson creates a bunch of socialization programs that basically, but you think about it from the point of view of, if you want to get this welfare funding and you live in a certain zone and district, the only way to get it is if you don't have a male in the home. Then you have all these, extreme war on drugs kind of a situation that happens shortly after. So you have a detrimental harm that's been placed on the generational gap for young men who are being raised without fathers, who don't know what their generational curse problems are, how to overcome them. They don't have the testimonials. And so they basically create the hierarchy of structure of the men who cared, the Black Panther Party and such. So I'm talking about the African American community, the little cousins, little Crips and the blood relatives and all like that, depending on where they come from and whatnot. And take Panther Party was being attacked. And then what happens shortly after is the structure changed to where that the younger ones that couldn't necessarily go serve in the military, but they still wanted to be a part of protecting their blood, perpetuates a controlling mechanism upon the African American communities. And yet today they use racial inequality as a way to provoke democratic, they provoke allegiance by way of the funding of these programs, these funding of these districts. But the parts that I want to remind you of is prisons carry a political value towards the population for the vote for regions and districts. So a lot of times a Republican or a specific district, Democrat or otherwise, have a privately owned prison and that population counts to the vote of that area. Now, it's important for me to address these things because it's not just saying PSYOPs. It's not just saying cointelligence. There's a lot of framework that's been, no, now you have some other breadcrumbs to follow the trail to see when you have a political elite. Please remember that Jamestown, Virginia, which became Washington, D.C., is a sovereign territory. It's like a free state base to make its own laws. And because you're using a zip code, you're using commercial corporate law, all capital letters in your name, corporate entity on your address with those numbers at the end of your zip. Okay, that zip code is actually saying to them that you're in commercial entity, you're in commercial trading with Postmaster General from DC and such. And thank goodness that we have some solutions now. Some of the stuff that's happened that I saw, you had War Castles, which is a series that's on YouTube. You can go find that, War Castles, if it's still available. Basically, we have solutions to these problems, but nobody's addressing the solutions. They're just causing more of a ruckus and more of a stir because they need a PSYOP. They need a co-intelligence measure, because if you don't have an enemy, you can't divide the individuals. So when we recognize that we have more alike, when we have more connected than we have divided, then and only then are we going to be able to overcome the situation. Neither one of the political affiliates were somebody that we chose. The structure that is right now. Remember how I told you the Esquires and the Supreme Court and how all this works is that you have a foreign legal system, the International Bar Association, that basically uses a common language of justice upon non-esquires or not, the citizens are corporations acting in trusts of these all capital letters. The people who are behind the robes and behind the barrister gates and all like that, you're entering into martial law, you're entering into maritime trade, you're entering into groups that allow them by your ignorance to have control over your vessel. It's important for you to do your own due diligence, your own research, your own study. But the reason why this is going on is if you can't see that the military has a co-intelligence operation, that we are in a time right now to where that basically China has called in its marker. It's called in its markers because it owns the majority of the United States deficit by loaning us money throughout the years and decades. And now, because we've switched from the fuel to the other stuff, the national parks, in my opinion, when they reinsured, and I think this was in December, and I had a page called Canon Movie on Facebook where I was recording and documenting everything. That was subsequently deleted after I'd already sent in the passport ID, verified who I was, and I was talking about matters of national importance. They deleted the page in its entirety because I was talking about red flags. I was talking about problems that, hey, the media is talking about this is what really happened. Hey, we've got some things going on in DC. Be conscious because if this happens, then this is going to cause replications and repercussions, excuse me. And so when I address an issue with you, I want you to research for yourself, but I also am trying to share with you some stuff that I've already dealt with in the sense of like, okay, so right now, when they reinsure all of our national monuments, when they reinsure all of our national forests, what they're actually doing with these fires that happen, whether you call it from the direct energy weapons or it was an electrical grid problem, whatever, this is land that they now have access to that they couldn't have built on prior to because it was controlled and structured in such a way. You have riots that are basically attacking national monuments and such, and those are all insurance claims. So we racked up a bunch of debt that way. Now they're printing currency, fiat debt, slavery. China is going lower and lower and lower. We've also cut ties with the majority of our shipping trade with China being our major supplier. It's causing other issues in China to where that now they are having to have some opposition to us. And this is the 19th of January. When the executive order was passed, I think it was like 3 or 4 days ago, announcing that military or Chinese military funding operations. Some are saying that the Chinese had some involvement with the election by way of the technology. Look, I can neither confirm nor deny any of those allegations towards what are possibly going on, because here's the facts. All of these people, government included, make money off of war. While Donald Trump has been in office, he has restricted the amount of foreign war so that all of these political allegiance politicians, all of these Democratic holding companies, all of these Republican holding companies for warfare, who get the contracts from the military to go overseas and bomb and rebuild locations, they are now not able to their normal livelihood. So they switched in the Obama administration to be about insurance, medical. Now they're using medical. They're imposing that upon the United States. With the med structure, now they've put everybody to a homebound situation, basically home arrest. They're saying that there's a pandemic going on. Look, I get all of the structure that's going on. This is nothing new in the sense of we were attacked by China, if you want to technically call it that, with the Wuhan situation. We're seeing that the technology from what they were doing there with things like the gigahertz spectrum of telecommunications affecting the attenuation of oxygen, causing radiation pneumatitis, causing basically them to go in and real estate wise take over an entire region, turn on a death grid if you could in your mind. We have these weapons because we have discussed them. Um, this is the nature of what happened in the Wuhan situation. We have also been gradually activating a grid here in the United States that causes the same kind of detrimental harm to our bodies while we have the cover story of COVID going on. I'm a little bit more skeptical of the narrative because I would not say that there's no COVID. I would actually say that the symptoms from radiation pneumonitis or being exposed to high spectrum wavelengths affects your body in such a way that's very similar to the effects of what COVID, causing a telecom grid, causing them to be sitting there watching their Netflix, being on their internet, watching their cell phones on daily. Their entertainment and their connection with the world has become through the internet. Be aware of the cause and the reality of what's going on. When I address anything to do with the spectrums of electromagnetic radiation, you have to keep in mind that for the first time since 1996, 1998, the qualifications of what was a dangerous spectrum have always been here 0 to 300 megahertz are dangerous. So now they've reclassified things. They still created the entire grid to include up to that 100 spectrum. So 0 to employed crowd control pain rays at 95 gigahertz, and it was caused from a distance. And it was used, and it's actually called a funny name, active denial weapon. And in Afghanistan, this is about 2010, 2011, we were using this stuff then. So we have the tools and the frequency to know that this is dangerous, that this causes this effect. And yet the attenuation of oxygen happens at 60 gigahertz, still in that spectrum of 0 to 100. They reclassified it from being 0 to 100 to saying 0 to 6 gigahertz, but the infrastructure is still built from 0 to 100. So I'm not going to get into anything more than be conscious of the fact that when somebody tells you something, do your diligence, research what they're saying, verify sources. If it doesn't have a verified source, that's totally journalism. So when I'm launching DL Herald and telling you guys the truth, you know that there's verified sources on the website. Follow up, do what you're going to do. This was a test run just to see what the processes were with the new technology, shooting at my office here with some of the books and such. I hope this message finds you well today. I hope it gives you a little bit more light at the end of the tunnel of what's going on, that ultimately when we band together and we re-establish how agriculture is our priority as a group and a community, we'll be able to feed and sustain the way that we're supposed to. Right now, they're structuring things in such a way to where that there's fear. Fear is a lack of awareness of self. You're a divine being. You have everything you need already. The abundant measure is bound within your perspective. Like literally, the only thing in your way is you. So all the other grandiose visions that are being shared with you, all of the other I wants and needs, all that other stuff that are going on with the television and the other marketing, remember that's marketing. That's propaganda. I would advise you to look up somebody by the name of Edward Bernays so that you can see why you have bacon in the morning, why women smoke cigarettes, and then why the whole thing happened for the women's liberation movement. And see that propaganda, public opinion, all of the public relations, propaganda, again, I would say it, cointelligence and PSYOP stuff, is all you handle it. Even with what I shared with you, some whoa, this is too much information. Why am I getting told about our history? Why am I getting told about the Smith-Mundt Act? What does this really mean? I thought this was going to be a video about a conspiracy theory or something. I thought this was going to be one of them guys that's going to tell me what QAnon is. Look, I don't have anything to do with any of the views in books that were coming out to explain the narrative of what was going on with JFK. I told you what it was about. Silver, coinage, making a king, die people. So the Bush family ended up taking over. Love you guys. Consider you family. Blessed be tree family. Let me know in the comments what you think. Does it help? Does this information give you strength? Does it cause any other problems? Because becoming powers you. And so I want to hear what issues you want to talk about. What issues that you really want to hear from me? I want to talk about the Bible stuff. Obviously, that's a passion of mine. I want to talk about agriculture, cannabis. We're going to talk about a lot of different stuff that's coming up. But the main important things are, I'm tired of seeing people asking me questions about, well, what do you think about the QAnon group? Look, it's cointelligence, in my opinion. Because real intelligence, like when I would get information from a leader, when I was working as a reporter or working with municipalities or whatever, real information is given to you under non-disclosure. It's given to you in a structure of proprietary information, classified structure, pulling somebody aside for a moment to say, hey, I want to make you conscious of this and this. A trusted asset. There is no trusted asset in the system. They're basically saying the big idea concept of what we can't talk about, the deep state that we can't talk about. Look, here's the facts. And all this other stuff is wishy-washy to me. When you go get a business, you create that capital letters interest. You turn that into an incorporation, turn that into an LLC. That interest is in getting copyrights and trademarks and intellectual property and patents and securing. That all capital letters entity is technically a person according to the government. It has the same protections that you have. So all of this is a commercially minded situation. All of this is designed about money. And in my opinion, the money, because it's got a dead person on it, it's got a little pagan owl on there of the Canaanite deity Molech, which there's an owl also at the DC Capitol. If you've ever seen any flyover pictures, you can see the owl at the Capitol building. In my particular opinion, this is a death cult operating and maintaining the leftover trustee money from everybody that has an early demise. That's why it's going on. And until you address the fact that we're in abundance, we never left the Garden of Eden, we're still in the garden. You just haven't been taking care of it. You lost who you really are. Could rediscover who you really are. Find what you love about life. Help other people. And rebuild. There's no other reason for this. Because the facts of the matter are, you have everything you need already. Who are the people that are telling you don't? The only person that matters is what you know. You're either in your own way or you're in affirmation with the divine being inside you. Now, I say that because we're all universal bodies. Love to talk to you at length about that, but you're going to have to watch some of my other videos. Blessed be tree family. Hope this message finds you well today.